There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt, and I really needed to get into an atmosphere where I could overcome that.
An exclusive story about priests helping other priests battle addiction in the Diocese of Brooklyn. Plus, could some COVID restrictions on churches in red zones be lifted soon? What Governor Cuomo is saying now. The faithful in Brooklyn honor Father Jorge Ortiz-Garay, the first priest in the United States to die from coronavirus. And human trafficking is a modern-day plague. How one group in Queens is using an unconventional form of therapy to help those who escaped. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. An estimated 15 million people struggle with an alcohol use disorder in the United States, but less than 10% receive any sort of treatment. Tonight, an exclusive story about priests helping other priests battle addiction in the Diocese of Brooklyn. They're not immune to it. In fact, their ministry may put them more at risk. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has the story from Maspeth, Queens, where a team of priests have become their brother's keepers.
The graduation picture from Cathedral Prep in 1972. That's when I was just beginning to start to drink.
Joseph Calise is a Catholic priest.
Some really wonderful, rich experiences.
He's also a recovering alcoholic.
But they could have been so much richer, and I could have brought so much more to them.
Monsignor Calise hasn't had a drink in 30 years, but he still remembers the pain, the wasted days, and the broken promises.
I set certain standards. I will never drink before a certain time of the day. And when I did, I just changed the time of the day. I'll stop drinking if this ever happens. If I ever drive when I know I'm under the influence. Thanks be to God, I never hurt anybody, but I did drive under the influence.
And he's not the only one. According to the St. John Vianney Center, 10% of all clergy suffer from addiction, a statistic Monsignor Calise has now devoted his life to changing.
And you'll notice that there are drinks on the table. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt, and I really needed to get into an atmosphere where I could overcome that.
He's now helping coordinate Transition House, a unique model designed for something rarely talked about.
This house provides a warm and welcoming atmosphere for any priest in need of time for healing.
We're equipped to house 4 men at once.
Transition House is run out of St. Stanislaus Kostk's rectory and serves as a built-in halfway house for clergy in the Brooklyn Diocese who have completed inpatient treatment. But it's not just for priests who suffer with addiction.
Not only after being released from treatment, but they can come here for a time of respite, a time of reflection.
Since the program began 3 years ago, 14 priests have come through Transition House. Half of them had been treated for some type of addiction.
We're giving an opportunity for turning into the family.
Monsignor Calise and Bishop Geppetto aren't alone in this undertaking. They partner with Monsignor Edward DORANC, who's a clinical psychologist and licensed counselor.
My responsibility in the Transition House is to be available to facilitate a climate of healing.
This is in the lobby at Guest House.
A full rectory can prove to be a supportive community, but with the slowing number of vocations, more and more priests returning from treatment are alone, making it harder to conquer sobriety.
If they go back to their rectories, very often priests today are alone, and it's very easy then to get caught up in the busyness of the priesthood.
Monsignor DORANC says part of the irony of being a priest is that the busier you are, the easier it is to be swallowed into a life of loneliness.
The busyness that's part of priesthood is both a blessing and a curse.
They can have Mass here.
The hope is the community Transition House offers will replace addiction in their lives, just like it did for Monsignor Calise.
They need that chance to find that time and place to feel compassion, but also to establish the self-respect that says, I deserve the compassion that I've received.
The goal of the program is simple, to let priests suffering in the shadows know there's help, and more importantly, there is a future.
Oh, that's the day I was named Monsignor.
In Maspeth, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
If any priest in the Brooklyn Diocese is interested in receiving treatment or struggling in any way, they can contact Transition House at 718-326-2185. All calls are confidential. A second judge has denied the Brooklyn Diocese's request to stop state-imposed restrictions on masses. Governor Cuomo's mandate for coronavirus hotspots limits the size of religious gatherings to 25% capacity or a maximum of 10 people. Last week, a different federal judge sided with the governor. Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio was disappointed with the ruling, saying the diocese presented a strong case for our right to worship. The bishop issued a statement saying, in part, "It is a shame our parishioners in the red zones cannot return to Mass when the judge acknowledged we have done everything right. We are now considering our appellate options," adding, "There is nothing more important than the safety of our parishioners. That is why we have worked diligently to implement strict COVID-19 safety rules that go above and beyond state requirements." Governor Andrew Cuomo announced today that the state could lift some COVID restrictions in red zones this week. The governor saying they are evaluating progress in some of those hotspots. He says the number of COVID cases in Queens has gone down. Cuomo will announce Wednesday if there are any adjustments to the shape and size of red zones. Meanwhile, the number of worldwide cases has surpassed a staggering 40 million. Here in the U.S., COVID infections continue to soar. Experts say following public health measures is the way out of the crisis. Camila Bernal reports.
The predicted fall surge is here, according to some health experts.
If we don't take this seriously now, we are going to find ourselves in a very difficult position in just weeks to maybe a month or so.
Worldwide, more than 40 million people have tested positive for COVID-19.
We have an increasing number of positive people.
And while cases are increasing in Europe, cities in Spain, the UK, and France are resisting centralized efforts to impose tighter regulations.
The current time is about action. It's about unity, it's about solidarity.
But with cases surging in Wales, the First Minister is implementing a 2-week shutdown.
This firebreak is the shortest we can make it, but that means that it will have to be sharp and deep in order to have the impact we need it to have on the virus.
Though the U.S. is now averaging 55,000 new cases per day, Dr. Anthony Fauci says a nationwide lockdown is not the way forward.
We can get control at the same time without shutting down.
This despite the COVID fatigue.
Universal wearing of masks, keeping a distance, avoiding congregate settings.
Camila Bernal, Currents News.
Brooklyn finally got to honor the first priest who died from COVID in the country, Father Jorge Ortiz-Garay. The memorial mass held with the diocese's Mexican apostolate was celebrated on what would have been Father Jorge's 50th birthday. Father Jorge was the director of the apostolate during his ministry. Auxiliary Bishop Octavio Cisneros presided over the mass, which was limited to 120 people because of the pandemic. Now to Washington, where the Supreme Court could have another Catholic justice on the bench as early as the end of the week. The Judiciary Committee is expected to convene this Thursday to vote to advance the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the full Senate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said he would hold a floor vote the following day, but Democrats could throw up a roadblock by demanding a quorum of senators be present for the vote and then not having a quorum present. If confirmed, Barrett would be sworn in at a ceremony that would be held immediately after the vote. That private ceremony would be led by Chief Justice John Roberts. Coming up later in this newscast, Mark DiGirolamo, the co-director of the Center for Law and Religion at St. John's University, will break down the hearings for us. That's still ahead in this newscast. The head of the Archdiocese of San Francisco went above and beyond to defend a controversial figure. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone performing a short exorcism ceremony outside a church where a statue of St. Junipero Serra was recently toppled. The intention to drive out evil and defend the 18th century priest. The ritual was performed before some 150 supporters. Protests in Chile have become detrimental for houses of worship as 2 Catholic churches burned during national demonstrations over rewriting the country's constitution. The bell tower of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary Church collapsed from the flames. Also under fire, the Church of the Santiago's police force. Though it's unclear why the 2 were targeted, the head of the Archdiocese of Santiago is urging for an end of the year-long violence.
It's already been a year since we suffered a breakout of violence that caused us so much personal pain, as well as a lot of material destruction. We thought it would be a bitter and powerful lesson. It has cost us a lot to reconstruct these buildings, and it's demanded sacrifices and constant discomfort from the most impoverished. Their lives were made more difficult.
Chile is expected to vote this Sunday on the viability of a constitutional reform. There's a lot more news headed your way. Catholic conservative Amy Coney Barrett could soon be confirmed to the Supreme Court. Is the process being rushed, or is it a normal proceeding? We'll explore that. Plus, grief in Paris and calls for freedom of speech following the deadly attack on a teacher. And we'll show you how a unique form of therapy is making a big impact on women who have survived human trafficking.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
By this time next week, we could have one more Catholic on the Supreme Court. The Senate could vote as early as the end of this week on President Trump's nominee, Judge Amy Coney Barrett. This after her confirmation hearing last week. Joining us now is Mark DiGirolamo, co-director of the Center for Law and Religion at St. John's University. And Mark, Amy Coney Barrett is receiving a lot of praise for how she handled herself during the hearings. And even though she's a conservative replacing a liberal on the high court, the tone of the hearings was quite different than it was for the Kavanaugh hearings. Why do you think that was?
Well, you're right about that, and thanks very much for having me. I think that she was asked a lot of questions on both sides that relate directly to her judicial office. Now, if you remember from the Kavanaugh hearing, actually, the Kavanaugh hearing itself went fairly smoothly, and then it was only after that, after the hearing when the Senate went to full vote, that we had the sort of craziness that ensued. So that hearing was also fairly regular, but this one surely was predictable and in some ways according to form.
Yeah, Judge Barrett's Catholicism has been a constant topic of conversation. So, of course, Roe v. Wade was a big part of the hearing. Let's listen in.
Do you agree with Justice Scalia's view that Roe can and should be overturned by the Supreme Court?
I can't express views on cases or pre-commit to approaching a case any particular way.
It seems like it's the same story with every Republican nominee for the Supreme Court, concerns that Roe v. Wade will be overturned. But it hasn't happened. Your thoughts on that?
Yes. So I think you're right. Roe v. Wade is and has always been and remains a controversial decision. And it's controversial, I think, in the society at large. Judge Barrett was asked questions, as all nominees are asked, about precedents like Roe versus Wade that continue to generate a lot of controversy. She obviously couldn't give any particulars with respect to any issues that would arise or might arise before her, but it seems, again, I would say par for the course with respect to recent nominations hearings for the focus to be on Roe versus Wade. If you remember, that was also the case for the Kavanaugh hearings. He was asked about Roe as well.
And, you know, since we're so close to the election, there was a lot of talk about the hearings being rushed. So the confirmation happens before November 3rd. Here's Senator Kamala Harris during the hearing.
Sadly, my Senate Republican colleagues are doing, I believe, great harm with this illegitimate process. And if they are successful, it has the potential to do great damage.
So was this process rushed, or is this a normal timeline for a confirmation hearing?
I would say it depends on your perspective. So in an election year, there have, in fact, been many nominations that have been pressed by presidents before the actual day of the election. including a very famous one involving Chief Justice John Marshall, who was one of the, if not the most important justices ever to serve on the court. That has happened on the order of 20 to 25 times in the nation's history. So it wasn't unusual in that sense. On the other hand, it was rather late in the election year. We're very, very close to the election date itself. Mm-hmm. And to that extent, it was somewhat unusual. I will say that its unusualness is mitigated, at least in part, by the fact that in the past, the Senate convened, recessed, I should say, over the summer. And so you had a long period of time where you didn't have consideration of any nominees. And so the timing within the election year is a little difficult to compare. But depending on your perspective, you'll either think that this is completely unprecedented or fairly standard practice.
All right, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Co-director of the Center for Law and Religion at St. John's University, Mark, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
If Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed, she'll hear cases challenging President Trump's border wall funding and asylum policies. The Supreme Court said today it would hear those cases most likely next year. The border wall case involves the Trump administration's attempts to use Pentagon funds to construct more barriers at the U.S.-Mexico border. The asylum case involves a policy requiring asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while they wait for hearings in the U.S. In Queens, a nonprofit organization is making a difference in the lives of survivors of human trafficking. Currents News' Emily Drooby shows us a unique program that is helping victims of this modern-day plague.
Laughter fills the room as survivors of human trafficking create their own art, a unique form of therapy.
When they come to Lifeway, they are experiencing different forms of trauma. There are times when they have a difficulty expressing themselves verbally.
The next words we're going to write are who we really are.
Lifeway's art expression program helping survivors do just that.
Within minutes, you were able to see that the women were the safe place, and they felt that this was an opportunity for them to be their authentic selves.
Founded by Sister Joan Dauber, Lifeway provides safe housing to women who have been trafficked and information to the public to spread awareness of this modern-day plague.
Then she transitioned to the yellow coloring.
While art therapy has been part of the program at Lifeway for a while, this workshop had some help from a familiar face.
These things aid in travel, escape.
Talitha Kuhman, their Patreon fundraising website, whom Currents News introduced viewers to back in early August. Now we're showing you how they're actually making a difference in the life of survivors. Producer of the initiative, Nikki Frankel, seen here dropping off about $1,000 worth of donated art supplies to the Lifeway Safe House. The donation made possible by artist John Couch, who is a part of the Patreon. He also taught the tutorial the survivors followed for this workshop. The supplies donated by Jerry's Artorama.
It's probably do one more level of white.
Many of these survivors have endured unimaginable horrors. Some haven't been removed from dangerous situations for that long. But in this powerful workshop, Lifeway Network employees began to see a real change, a step towards healing.
I've also witnessed a survivor who is fresh out of her compelling situation, creating a masterpiece, but was unable to share that with everyone, but the work was so incredible.
It helped them process the situation that they were currently in, to think of things in a different way, and also show them that there's other ways of expressing yourself other than verbally.
The survivors found the program to be so helpful that Lifeway has decided to hold similar workshops in the future. On the Upper East Side, Emily Drooby, Currents News.
Catholic children in countries around the world gathered on Sunday to pray the Rosary for peace. These children from a parish in northern Iraq recited the Rosary and prayed for an end to the pandemic and for all those who are suffering. The initiative for unity and peace, 1 million children pray the Rosary, was promoted by Aid to the Church in Need. In Paris, a call for protections for free speech following a horrific, deadly attack on a teacher. He was beheaded after he showed caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad from a controversial satirical magazine to his class. Jim Bitterman reports.
In a country that puts a high value on education, Friday's attack and beheading of a middle school teacher has provoked a huge outpouring of grief. In Paris and dozens of other cities, thousands gathered in tribute to Samuel Paty, the 47-year-old teacher who had conducted a class discussion on freedom of expression centered around caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad from the controversial satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, a discussion that became the focus of social media anger from Islamic fundamentalists. France takes pride in laïcité, the secular nature of its institutions. The brutal killing of Paty stirred memories of the other acts of Islamic terrorism that have occurred here. But it raised questions, too, about whether Paty should have been better protected, especially given the internet threats teachers face.
It's a reality, and nobody seems to take it seriously, and our bosses do not protect us at all.
Still, police were not faulted in their response after the attack. As seen in this video, within minutes, they had chased down the 18-year-old perpetrator, and officers can clearly be heard in French ordering him to lay down his arms. And when he didn't, police brought him down with a volley of bullets. More tributes, including a national one on Wednesday, are scheduled later this week, with thousands of teachers expected to take part as they did Sunday. More than 1 million French are involved in the national education system here. It's viewed as a cornerstone to the country's principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Perhaps the reason the Minister of Education and others here have said that Friday's brutal murder was not just an attack on a single teacher, but on the French Republic itself. Jim Bitterman, Paris.
The suspect who was shot and killed by police was identified as an 18-year-old Russian refugee of Chechen origin. 11 people are in police custody in connection to the suspected Islamic attack. Still to come on Currents News, we're heading to Italy without leaving our homes. First stop, Milan, for a breathtaking tour of a church covered in beautiful paintings, how you can get an up-close look. Then to the Vatican museums, we'll show you how to become an insider and help protect one of the world's oldest cultural institutions. It's known as the Sistine Chapel of Milan, and you're invited for a visit, but you don't have to leave your home. The breathtaking artwork, which decorates almost every inch of this 14th century church, can now be viewed in an online 3D tour. The goal is to make La Certosa di Garignano and other Italian cultural sites more accessible. You can zoom in on the paintings and read about them free of charge. And finally tonight, how about an online journey of faith and beauty? That's how a new Vatican Museum subscription series is being touted. It's called the INSIDER'S course. It's a 2-year online program that takes you behind the scenes to hear about the history and mission of the museums, to see the papal apartments, and learn more about the collections. There is a fee which goes to the museum, and if you complete the full program, you get a certificate. Now, you can choose between 1 or 2 semesters, which begin this month. So if you're interested, you can register online at patronsvaticanmuseums.org. Again, that's patronsvaticanmuseums.org. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.